Hey guys, we are now just 10 days away from the midterm elections on the 8th of November, and so in this video, we'll be taking a look at the latest polls that have been released for the 2022 Senate elections. We have a whole ton of new data, and these new polls are going to be more telling of what's actually going to happen in November than any polls we've seen in the past, simply because they've been released so close to the actual election. So in Pennsylvania, we have new data suggesting that Mehmet Oz may actually end up defeating John Fetterman, while in Nevada, overall, Catherine Cortez Masto has retaken the polling lead, but these polls here do show Laxalt in a more favorable position. We also see a very close race that continues to occur in Ohio between J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan. We have new data from Georgia, Florida, and Arizona as well, where Mark Kelly is in a very tough battle for his re-election. And so basically, over the last 2 days, we've seen polls come out from every single major race on the ballot, every single one of the states that is in gray right now, we have polls from, and basically these are all competitive elections. So today we'll be taking a look at the new polls in these races and what they will mean for the actual midterms in just 10 days. And so we're just going to get right into it, starting off with the latest polls from Pennsylvania. The Keystone State is a make or break for Democrats this year. They have to win it if they lose any seat in Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. And at this point, it's impossible for Democrats to win all three of these races. I think there's a good chance they can win two, but it's more likely that they might even just win one out of these three seats. But if they do end up winning two, they must flip Pennsylvania if they want to maintain their majority in the upper chamber. So right now, we're seeing some pretty negative trends for Democrats in this race, mainly as a result of that debate between John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz just 3 days ago. As of the release of this video, John Fetterman's stroke has severely impacted his campaign, and he looked terrible on the debate stage. Yes, of course, he is still recovering from his medical issues, but the fact that he couldn't really string his sentences well together at all was one of the main reasons why Mehmet Oz has gained so much support in just the last few days. So when looking at all of these other polls, the debate was held on the 25th of October. So every poll besides this Insider Advantage poll was conducted before the debate, and they all showed John Fetterman leading. John Fetterman has maintained a very strong lead in the polls over the last 6 months. However, just recently he has lost a lot of that advantage as a result of Mehmet Oz being more aggressive in his campaigning. And then of course the debate here shows Oz up by 3 points after it occurred, and this is a major sign that this race may actually be one that Republicans are going to win, and so that means they might actually end up holding onto a seat that was pronounced lost for them for a very long time ago. So in Pennsylvania right now, my projection is lean Republican. I do think Mehmet Oz is going to come out on top at this point in time, but things can definitely still change. John Fetterman, I think, would have been a great candidate if he did not have a stroke. I think that if his stroke did not affect him on the campaign trail, I think he would still be in a very favorable position to win. But now that we are just 10 days until the election, his stroke is still affecting him pretty significantly, and that is a huge turnoff to voters across the country. If you're the party that's in power and you run candidates that don't look great to voters, you're going to struggle to win in races where you run candidates like those. So John Fetterman, I think he was a very strong nominee to begin with, but as a result of his medical issues, that's probably going to be what's going to bring him down. So right now, I have Pennsylvania as a lean state for Republicans, which means that this is going to be a big win for the GOP and will increase their chances at maintaining a majority pretty significantly. And next up in Nevada, we have another one of the closest elections of the year. Here we have the election between Catherine Cortez Masto and Adam Laxalt. Masto winning will be crucial for Democrats, and she is actually ahead in the polling average now. She recently retook the lead for the first time since late September. However, when looking at the three most recent polls, they all show Adam Laxalt ahead. This Echelon Insights poll, there was really only one poll, but they did ask who voted with support if they could not choose any third-party candidates. And then we also have a Trafalgar Group poll, which has Laxalt up by 4. And then there was a third poll that also had Laxalt in the lead. This poll was conducted by Data for Progress. But we also have a poll conducted over the course of 14 days, which shows that Catherine Cortez Masto actually ahead by 13 points according to the University of Nevada. And so that's what's brought her numbers up so much. She is now only down by 0.4% in the polling average. And so I still do think that she's going to lose, but this is definitely a positive development for Democrats. I think that in the next few weeks, if things continue to trend better for them in the state, they do still have a chance of holding onto the seat. Of course, they have the incumbent, so obviously they're still very very much in the race. But Adam Laxalt's campaign is doing better than his governor campaign in 2018, which he lost to Steve Sisolak. But the national environment this year is also very different from the environment that we had in 2018. And so at this point in time, I do think he is on track to winning the state of Nevada, although just barely, because it is only going to be a tilt Republican state according to my latest projections. I think Nevada is going to be closer than Pennsylvania. That debate really did screw over Fetterman's chances, and so this is going to be a second win for Republicans in these very close states. And then according to the 530 forecast as of right now, Laxalt has a 53% chance at winning, and if you're wondering what the numbers are in Pennsylvania, it still favors Fetterman 59-41, but I think that as more polling data comes out for this race, we're going to see the odds go up for Oz. Now, moving on to Ohio, we have a very close election between J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan, and at least according to the polling, Vance is up by 5, Ryan is up by 4 in the two latest polls that have been conducted. However, when looking at the polling average, Tim Ryan is behind by 1.4%. He was actually ahead for almost 4 months between July and October, but J.D. Vance has recently retaken the lead, and he's been ahead ever since. And so this is a result of most of the new polls showing Vance with the advantage in this election, and due to the Democratic pattern of underperforming polling expectations in this state, I do think J.D. Vance has enough of a polling lead to almost guarantee a victory for him just because he is a Republican. If this election was held in a 2018 type environment, I do believe J.D. Vance would be able to actually lose this race against Tim Ryan, even though Ohio is a pretty red state at this point. Democrats have underperformed polling expectations in 2020, 2018, and 2016 pretty significantly. I mean, the polls had Donald Trump winning Ohio by 0.8% in 2020, and in the end, Biden lost it by 8%. So Ohio has a tendency to overpoll Democrats, at least pollsters in the state, and so that as a result, I'm going to categorize Ohio as a likely Republican state, despite this being what the polls currently show. And I think that in the end, J.D. Vance will be able to pull off a victory just over 5 points. I think it will still be a close and competitive election, but Tim Ryan probably is not going to get within a 5-point margin. It's not going to be anywhere near a double-digit margin for J.D. Vance, but I think that a likely categorization will be more accurate in the end. In Colorado, though, Democrats are doing better and better, with Michael Bennet ahead of Joe O'Dea by 16 points in the latest poll. Looking at the polling average, Bennet is ahead by 10.8% now as a result of this new poll. And when looking at the other polls, Bennet has been ahead by double digits in almost all of them. A-rated pollsters or even Republican pollsters all show him ahead. And so Michael Bennet right now is clearly on track to winning re-election to a third term. That is absolutely not in doubt, but I do think the race is going to be still pretty competitive, as Republicans are trying to win this state, even though it's going to be very unlikely that they do so, even in a year like 2022. So Colorado is going to remain a likely Democratic state, but it will still be a race to watch. And then moving on to Georgia, we have another one of the deciding elections this year, and here we have the election between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Walker is running to challenge the Democratic incumbent, and things are looking up for his campaign, despite being behind for such a long time in the polls. The four most recent polls have all shown him defeating Raphael Warnock. We have a poll released yesterday conducted by Rasmussen Reports, which has Walker ahead by 5, and then 2 polls conducted the day before, which shows Walker up by 3 and Walker up by 4. So when looking at the polling average, Raphael Warnock is now ahead by just 1.7%, despite being ahead by 4 at the very beginning of this month. And this is a result of, like I said before, the 4 most recent polls all having Herschel Walker as the winner, even though if you look at the polling spread previously, they all had Warnock ahead. And so this shift in favor of Herschel Walker is matching the national trend that we're seeing right now, in which Republicans are gaining both momentum and support in most of the races across the country. Now, I do think it's still possible for Warnock to win. He's been leading in the polls ever since late June. As an incumbent, he does have pretty significant advantages, but at this point, I don't think any candidate is going to win on the 8th of November. I do think Georgia will have a runoff election. I think that race will be held in December. And so at this point, I cannot make a projection for the election in the Peach State, because what happens in the other races is going to have a major impact on what happens in the runoff. If Democrats can get to 49 seats without Georgia, and Georgia would be their 50th seat, they would have much more momentum going into the election in which Warnock is running for re-election in, than if they had already lost the Senate, because at that point, point, there'd be no real incentive to elect another Democrat if they're just going to lose the majority anyways. And so at this point, I'm not going to make a projection for Georgia. I will do that when the time comes after a runoff is declared, because at this point, it's almost guaranteed that neither Herschel Walker or Ralph Lee Warnock are going to reach a majority. We do have a third-party candidate, that being Chase Oliver, who might even get up to 5% of the vote. We do have a poll from South Dakota showing John Thune ahead by 31%, but of course Republicans are going to win that race. There's no point in talking about that election. South Dakota is obviously going to go red. Brian Bangs stands no chance against the Republican incumbent, who is the Republican majority whip. While in Florida, we have a race between Val Demings and Marco Rubio that is more competitive, but the latest polling is showing Marco Rubio with an expanding lead. We also have polls released a little bit earlier, Rubio up by 11 and Rubio up by 7 once again. And so when looking at the polling average, he is now up by 7% on average against Val Demings. Val Demings, of course, is currently a member of the House, and Rubio has served in the Senate since 2011, so he's now running for his third term. Every single poll for this election has shown Marco Rubio in the lead, and so in the end, he's obviously going to win, and I do think he's almost guaranteed now to win by a margin over 5%. The 538 forecast currently gives him a 93% chance at winning re-election against Val Demings. So this election isn't going to be that close. It's still going to be an important one because Florida is a big state, but as it continues to shift to the right, Democrats are going to struggle, especially in a year like this. So Florida is going to be likely Republican, and there's no doubt about that. Next up in Arizona, we have another must-win election for Democrats. Mark Kelly is running for re-election to his first full term after winning by 2 points in 2020. That was a special election, so he will appear on the ballot once again this year. He's up against Blake Masters. Blake Masters is doing better and better as the election nears. However, Mark Kelly still maintains a 3.6% lead in the polls. I think there right now is enough support for Mark Kelly that he does still end up winning re-election, although with only a plurality of the vote. Blake Masters is definitely gaining on his Democratic opponent, but with Masters down by just so much when this month first began, he really did have a lot of room to make up, and I don't think he's going to be able to do so in just the next 10 days. So far, Blake Masters has not led in a single poll that's ever been released for this race. Not even the most Republican polls have ever put Blake Masters in the lead against Mark Kelly. If Republicans had chosen a better candidate, I do think they will be able to win this election just like they're winning in Nevada and Pennsylvania. But Mark Kelly is a strong incumbent, and running as weak of a candidate as Blake Masters is going to hinder their chances pretty significantly. Right now, the thing that's helping Blake Masters the most is Carrie Lake and her strong campaign for governor against Katie Hobbs. I think Katie Hobbs screwed herself over with denying a debate between the two candidates, and that pretty much ended her campaign, as she really has no reason for that, even though she said that's because Carrie Lake likes to lie just way too much, that a debate wouldn't be constructive. When you're running in a state that has a pretty significant chunk of Republicans, a state that Republicans have controlled for such a long time, trying to avoid a debate is not a good look. And so with Carrie Lake doing better in the governor election, Blake Masters is also doing in the Senate race, although I think in this case, Republicans are not going to win, even though in the gubernatorial election, Carrie Lake has a very good chance at defeating Katie Hobbs to succeed Doug Ducey. And 538 right now gives Mark Kelly a 69% chance at winning re-election, but according to my forecast, I think the election is going to be only tilt Democratic, with this race being decided by less than 1%, but still in favor of Mark Kelly. I think Mark Kelly does go into the race still in a relatively strong position, considering where Democrats are nationally. And so now we do have the four most competitive races covered: Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. I'll add a special citation for Georgia in just a moment, but in all four of these races, we have very close elections, so Democrats can still take back the race in Pennsylvania. 2 weeks is a long time in politics, but right now it does look like Mehmet Oz has the clear advantage, while in Pennsylvania and Arizona, these races could go both ways. If Democrats win both, they have a very good chance at maintaining their seat in Georgia. But we do have some polls from some less competitive races now, with the first one being in New York, where Chuck Schumer leads by 15% against Joe Pinion. He is now up by 16 points in the average, and the reason why Republicans are doing so much better is mainly a result of Lee Zeldin performing very well against Kathy Hochul in the governor election, but though I do think that Chuck Schumer will still be able to pull off a solid margin in the Empire State. And we also do have some more competitive races left as well, especially in New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. But in Illinois, the polls suggest a strong Democratic victory here as well. Tammy Duckworth leads by 14.7 points against Kathy Salvi in the polling. And of course, Tammy Duckworth is on track to winning a second term in office. And I think that even though there's a chance she wins by just under 15 points, a solid rating is a much more accurate in terms of categorizing just how competitive this election is going to be. So Illinois is going to be solid Democratic. And then we also have a poll from Iowa. Here, Chuck Grassley leads by 8% against Michael Franken. The election in Iowa is surprisingly close, considering that Chuck Grassley is a 7-time incumbent who won by 21 points back in 2016. But this year, even though Mike Franken is running a strong campaign, he still has no chance at winning. But I think that he will make this race only likely Republican, and I don't think Chuck Grassley is going to win by a solid margin of over 15 points. So Democrats are definitely going to perform better than they should in an election in a state that Chuck Grassley has been so dominant in for 4 decades. But as Grassley wins his 8th term, his electoral prowess is weaker than ever. So Iowa is going to be a state that I think Chuck Grassley will be able to carry by 10 to 13 points. In Wisconsin, we have a new poll showing Ron Johnson ahead by 5% against Mandela Barnes. This race is basically lost for Democrats. For a while, it looked like Barnes might actually win, but Wisconsin was always going to be a difficult state for Democrats to flip. Ron Johnson is a 2-time incumbent that won in 2016 by 3 points, despite the polls showing that he was going to lose. And so with him now ahead in the polls by 3 points, I think it will translate to a likely margin of victory for him this November. 538 gives him a 77% chance at a victory. Ron Johnson is definitely on track to winning a 3rd full term, and so Wisconsin is going to be a likely Republican state just like Ohio, and the margin is not going to be over 10% and not much over 5 points either, but it will still be a win for Republicans nonetheless, in a seat that really did look pretty vulnerable for them for quite a while, especially when it looked like Ron Johnson was actually going to retire, as he promised he would do so after his 2016 win. But of course, with the pressure from Trump and other top Republicans, Ron Johnson made the choice to actually run once again, and that was a great decision for Republicans, because without Ron Johnson as the incumbent on the ballot, they would have struggled a lot more. And next up, in Connecticut, we have the race between Richard Blumenthal and Leora Levy. The latest poll shows Richard Blumenthal ahead by 12 points. This race is surprisingly competitive because back in 2016, Blumenthal won his first term by 29%. Leora Levy definitely is doing much better than Republicans were 6 years ago, but she is still not going to win. I think the margin might be under 10%, but it's more likely that Blumenthal is going to win by just 10 to 11. And so Connecticut is going to be a likely Democratic state. It's still going to be a race that Democrats are guaranteed to win, but not as much as states like New York or Illinois. And then we have just 2 races left to look at in North Carolina and New Hampshire. So in North Carolina, right now, we have a very close election according to the most recent poll conducted by the A-rated Marist College, which shows Sherry Beasley and Ted Budd in an even position in the Tar Heel state. According to the polling average, though, Budd is ahead by 2.6%, and in the end, Republicans are going to win this state. Sherry Beasley is not going to flip the seat in North Carolina. The last time the Democrats won a statewide Senate election in the state was back in 2008, and that has not happened since basically that time when Kay Hagan defeated Elizabeth Dole, even though Democrats have tried very, very hard over the last decade. In 2022, a red wave year really is not going to be the time that Democrats take back the state, and so even though North Carolina continues to see a slight shift to the left, that is not going to be noticed in a 2022 election, and so Ted Budd will come out on top, and I do think he'll win by a likely margin, just like Republicans are going to do so in Wisconsin and Ohio. Not big likely margins, but just barely over that 5% mark. And finally, in New Hampshire, we still have a very close race between Maggie Hassan and Don Bolduc. This election has become increasingly competitive, as new polls showed Don Bolduc doing better than before. In fact, the most recent poll released has Maggie Hassan ahead by 6 points, and then another one showed Hassan ahead by just 1. So when looking at the average, the numbers have gone down for Hassan in just the last couple of days, even though she's still very, very likely to win. The most recent Don Bolduc campaign poll still has Hassan ahead by 2. Republicans are now pouring more money into this race, but I think that in the end, Democrats are still going to come out on top. Maggie Hassan defeated a Republican incumbent back in 2016 by 0.1%. I don't think her election could get any closer this year, and so I do think that New Hampshire is going to go to Democrats, but only by a lean margin. It's not going to be a likely Democratic state anymore, as Don Bolduc definitely has seen a slight increase in support over the last few weeks. And so that will be it for this video. We definitely got a whole ton of very interesting new polls, and I'll continue to keep you guys updated on this channel over the next 10 days before the midterms, and of course for the Georgia runoffs as well. So when looking at this map as a whole, Republicans aren't in a better position than before, but they are not at all guaranteed a victory. Democrats still have a very good chance at maintaining the majority themselves, and so we're just going to have to see what happens in the next 10 days, as they will be crucial in determining the outcomes in races like Nevada and Pennsylvania. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which party you think will win the majority in November, and I will see you guys in the next video.